Jewish. And one of the performers was Joshua Nelson, and Rabbi Pengen actually gets the credit for saying, boy, what if we got Joshua Nelson for our Rosh Hashanah? Which was an inheritance from the Temple Road of Torah. When the two congregations got together, one of the things that was important to them was their Rosh Hashanah tradition. And this year, Saul Kay was someone that I had known from the circuit, from going around. And yeah, you could probably find someone in every genre.
And if you like that music, the URJ is actually doing a 150th anniversary celebration in December this year. It's a weekend away in Washington, and they bring in all of this wonderful music into the services that they do. So think about attending. I actually have a dream, but I haven't been able to locate them. But when I was down for a convention in New Orleans, there was a New Orleans jazz band with a big tuba that led the service for us, and like I dream still today of bringing them here to lead services. So there are a lot of really interesting performers out there, and a lot of interesting Jewish music.
If you don't mind me adding, the Rock Shabbat Committee does a lot of work with that, and we have a fund that supports this event, so that's been a great support for us as well.
Cantor, who else is coming for Rock Shabbat this year?
Oh boy, we got a roster of people coming from like Julie Silver, who wrote the beautiful. We start the songs with Shiru Ladonai Kol Haaretz. We have the composer of Am I Awake, Noah Aronson, coming this year. We have the composer of Roll Into Dark, Rabbi Noam Katz, coming this year, along with a couple of other surprises.
Say shalom like we did today, and on Friday nights, some of us, I don't know where the motions come from. I'm not sure what they all mean.
So a few years ago, Melissa Pescatori and I talked about how to better engage our kids in learning the prayers, and we both agreed that actually having services, a 10-minute tefillah is what we call it, at the beginning of each day that the kids are in religious school, then allows them to use what they're learning in classroom. And in order to make it fun for them, we do all of these songs that have hand motions. So when we do Oseh Shalom Bimromav, which means may God who makes peace in the heavens, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, may God bring it down to us on the earth. Ve'al kol Yisrael, to all of Israel, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, and to all of the people, ve'imru, and let us say, ve'imru, amen. So that's the secret behind the song. But it makes it palatable to the kids and engages them. As teachers, we always want to engage kids both in mind, in ears, in eyes, and in body.
Teacher there, thank you, my daughter. They're so into it when we do that. It really engages them, and so when we're there on Friday nights, whether we're the teachers or the students are there, it really brings them, and it brings it like full circle, and it helps, and they love it, and they love seeing the teachers doing it too, and it brings us as a community together, and it's been a really great addition.
Yeah, and it, I think, also sort of highlights for them in services what they've learned in school and where it's used here.
I'd like to know when, brought up in a very traditional way, I'd like to know when all the ahs came ahs and the suf came tough.
Sure. Well, I'm going to explain why it's that way in the Reform movement. Ashkenazic Hebrew comes from Eastern European, and that's the aw and the s, yiskadal, v'yiskadash. I can't even say it, Adonai, because I wasn't brought up with it. And that comes from Eastern Europe. And then the the other brand of Hebrew is Sephardic, which is Yit Gadal and Adonai. So the Reform movement, when it chose which strand to follow, which linguistical strand to follow, decided to choose the Sephardic because that is the language that's spoken in Israel. The Orthodox still speak Yiddish and they still use the aw and the s for tav, but modern Hebrew is grounded in Sephardic pronunciation. And so we pronounce it that way here so that if our kids, if our families go to Israel, it will feel familiar to them.
First of all, did you get the first unicorn for your
I
shofar?
did get, yes, this is my unicorn shofar. It's actually a kudu horn. Kudus have rounded horns, but also this, and I saw it in Israel, and I thought, that's just cool. And then what happened was I put it in my trunk, and it blended into the trunk, and I didn't know where I put it. I swore I had lost it one year, and then this year I actually had to clear out my trunk for something. I was like, oh, there's my unicorn horn.
So the real question, why do some congregations and even conservative do not stand for the Shema, and we do?
So, do you want to say something? I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, sure. I would say that the main reason is for custom. That is to say that for the most part, when choosing when to stand for a particular for a particular piece of liturgy often depends on what people have done in the past in that particular community. And so for the Shema in the Reform movement has a particular resonance for people because it is, as what we would call the watchword of our faith, right? That it's our anthem, right? That God is one. And so some communities see it as that is the point at which we remain standing through because it is so important. We're not going to be sitting while we say Shema. That is one school of thoughts. Others are that it doesn't take precedence per se over some of the other prayers that we say, and therefore there's no reason to elevate it by standing in one part of the service than others. And I'm sure that there are other explanations that can also be given.
So in essence, it was the Reform movement saying which prayers are important. If we stand for a particular prayer, we say that it's important. Now, you may also ask, why do we stand from Baruch Hu to Shema? Because if we told you to sit after Baruch Hu, you'd be sitting and standing and sitting and standing. So this is just really practicality that we keep the congregation standing from Baruch Hu to Shema, and then we sit.
A question for, is this thing on? A question for Rabbi Falco. What inspired you to become a rabbi?
That's a great question. To make a long story short, I guess that when you can't have something, you really want it that much more. For some families, none of whom exist here in our community, but children are often reticent to wake up early on, say, a Sunday morning or even during the weekday and attend religious school as an extra kind of thing to do. I didn't have the opportunity to when I was younger, and I had always wanted to. So my friends would complain about having to go and after school and say, oh, now I have to go do more school. And I would think to myself, I don't know any of that stuff. I want to learn that stuff. When the opportunity came such that I was able to lead an openly Jewish lifestyle, I came from a mixed marriage, and Judaism was not welcome in the home. And so when I was able to go to my first Shabbat service ever, and I remember hearing the cantor singing Debbie Friedman's Lechi Lach, and I felt like everything I had ever been teaching myself up to that point, not in religious school, but in secrecy, you might say, had led up to that point, and I knew ever since then that I would want to become a rabbi, and I've been on that path ever since.
And we're glad.
Thank you.
Over the last 150 years, the Reform movement has been very good at changing to build our community and to make for the next future generation. Just talking about music, I mean, we went from music that was very familiar to the Lutheran Church and the Church of England, all the way to camp music, to now blues music, bluegrass music. Our liturgy has changed. What do you think we need to do now to change for our next generation, for our community, to ensure that it's growing and strengthening? I mean, I'm at a spot now, that old commercial, this is not your father's Buick. Well, it's not your father's shul anymore.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, firstly, I think, we always want to be asking ourselves, is what we're doing here meaningful? Because if it's meaningful, then I think people will come. And I think one of the things we all agree upon here is we want Judaism to be joyful and fun. Because if it's joyful and fun, then people come. People come for Simchat Torah. People come for hot diggity dog Shabbat. More food, I think, is the key. I also think we need to be thinking strategically about bringing what we're doing outside of the walls of the congregation. I think that's one thing that we need to really consider and begin sort of programming, like going into people's homes and building more community around smaller gatherings of people, connecting them with Jewish tradition. And there was one other thing I was thinking.
I think I know what you were thinking, which is reform is a verb, and that we've always been updating and responding to the times and seeing how Judaism fits there. And because we are in the 21st century and Judaism is still around and we're still engaged, we know that we've done something right.
Yeah, and I think we also need to listen to what the future generations find meaningful. The other thing I think we need to think seriously about is dues structure. We've been doing a lot of work in our congregation on moving towards more voluntary giving. If more people gave voluntarily, we can potentially lessen the dues, which I think lowers the bars to participation. It would be wonderful if we had a Vatican that could give us millions of dollars every year, right? And the Catholic movement is supported from a central place, a central fund. We don't have that, which is why we have dues, because that's what supports the congregation. And that's why it's really important this year. We're really pushing to move from 40% participation in our annual appeal to 50% participation in our annual appeal, so we can begin to potentially move in that direction of being able to rework the categories of dues. So this is my appeal to all of you. If you can up your donation this year, it will help us to reach this goal. And if you can encourage your friends to also donate and participate, it would be super helpful.
If we all start wearing red yarmulkes like the park, we get money.
No, if we wear red kippot, we don't get money. But I always say to my priest friends when they go visit the Pope, hey, if I give you one, can you get me one from the Pope? Because that'd be kind of cool, I think. Yes.
Thank you. I also grew up in the conservative movement, and it was always my understanding that the shofar is not blown on Shabbat. And I was very surprised yesterday.
Surprise!
When not only was it blown, but it was blown.
So,
and please explain.
yes, it's funny because for Rosh Hashanah dinner, I was with my friends, the Ponts. Michael Pont is the rabbi over at Marlborough Jewish Center. And we were having a really interesting discussion about this because he said that a bunch of his colleagues had gotten together to talk about their sermons and share what they were writing about. And one of the things that came up was they said in the conservative, he asked, do you sound shofar? And I said, we do. And he said, so it's so interesting because one of my colleagues said it's time for us to get rid of that not sounding the shofar on Shabbat. It's time for us to rethink that in the conservative movement. Because the reason why you wouldn't sound the shofar on Shabbat is because you would have to carry it with you. Now, you're carrying stuff right now, right? We are not a halachic movement, and so the reform movement sort of balanced what's primary here, what's important. And shofar is so intrinsic to the Rosh Hashanah experience that to take it out of the service really misses something. And so the decision was, do we worry about carrying when most of our congregation is carrying anyway, or do we sound the shofar? The other thing that I'd like to say about that is it's very easy to leave a shofar where you're going to sound it the night before the Chag begins, exactly. So I didn't carry it, I just brought it from my office to here, which is not considered carrying it. If I take it out of the building, that's considered carrying. So I have one I keep in my car, and one I keep here. Well, so that's the carrying thing, that when you carry from the public to the private, or the private to the public, that's considered work. So that's why it's considered, that's the carrying. So I'm sorry if it jolted you, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. Exactly.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
So, first of all, congratulations on passing 20 years being
Thank
at
you.
the temple. So how is the temple, and how different do you feel now compared to when you first came in 20 years ago?
You couldn't have told me that question beforehand?
Just thought of it.
So there's so much, I mean, first of all, I don't feel like I've been here 20 years. In some ways, I still feel new because I couldn't tell you the names of the different shopping centers that I've lived next to. Like, people will say it's in Yorkville, and I still say, which one is that? I look back with great pride at, the partnership that I've had with our lay leadership. When I got here, the synagogue was really hurting. It was in a very difficult place because there had been a lot of stuff with a rabbi and leaving, and a lot of heartache and fracture and lawsuits, and the first few years were really just sort of processing through that. And then, I'd say around year 15, it finally felt like the board shifted to leadership that had been working with me from the start. And that was kind of a sea change. But we've done so many good things. I'm sitting here looking at this tree of life, symbolic of all the joys we share, but also the merger, and the homeless shelter that we've participated in for 15 years, which was not a given. We had someone quit the congregation when we said we were doing it because they were afraid their child in religious school in that room would get AIDS. And I said, are they sleeping with the men or sharing needles? Because that's not the way it's going to happen. And the board was not on board at the time. But I look back with great pride. I think that we have, I look at the staff that we've cultivated over the years and where we began and where we are now. And so I'm proud, I'm happy, and I look forward to what we'll continue to do together.
Well, I just want to say one thing. Without the rabbi, our spiritual leader, I don't think the congregation would be as great as it was. And the board has changed because of our rabbi as well. So I want to thank her for all her work.
So having been through preschool here and bar mitzvah and confirmation, and now having my daughter come back and sing in the junior choir that I came to, a lot of the traditions are familiar to me. And one thing that I've noticed that has disappeared, and I think I might know why, based upon yesterday, is it the Hakafah, is the parading around of the Taurus?
So
why did that, is it a COVID thing that disappeared?
It was a COVID thing. 3 years ago when COVID began, when people are leaning in, hundreds of people are leaning in, and Cantor and I actually used to do the Hakafah with the Torahs. This year we decided not to do it for the holy days because if we go down, we want to be healthy, which is why we modified some things. But we did decide to bring it back based on, the trajectory of things.
That was always a favorite for me growing up.
Yeah,
You didn't get to touch
it's a
the Torah.
favorite for everyone. It felt very strange not to have it for all these years. So I'm glad that we can now start to put it back in place.
Just a little heavy on the Torah. Why did Isaac not protest being bound? Why did he not do something more? What's the rabbi's take on that?
So what's kind of interesting about it is that the first thing you have to ask is, how old is Isaac when this happens? How old is he? He's 37. Okay, so he could take down his 100-year-old dad like that. So the rabbis asked the same thing, and Rashi, I'll quote Rashi if you want to jump in with anyone else, but Rashi, who's a medieval commentator from France, ties it back into the first words of the Torah portion, which say, "Vayehi achar hadvarim ha'ela." It happened after these divarim, after these things, or also words. And they ask, what are the words that go on? Now, Rashi gives us two midrash, two possibilities. The first is that the divarim, the words, might have been between God and Satan. Now, Satan is not like Satan, but Satan is a literary character who shows up in midrash to sort of question people's faith. And Satan says to God, hey, you gave Abraham and Sarah this child in their old age, and they never thanked you for it. And God says, if I asked him to sacrifice that child, he wouldn't hold back. He loves me so much. So that's the first question. Is it a test of Abraham's faith? But then the second set of divarim, of words that Rashi shares with us, is a story about Ishmael, Abraham's son from Hagar, his first son, and Isaac. And Ishmael says to Isaac, Isaac, you think you're so great, but I was circumcised at the age of 13 and I didn't protest, right? That's got to be pretty traumatizing. And Isaac responds to Ishmael in that moment by saying, if God asked me to sacrifice my whole self, you think with just one little piece of your body you intimidate me, but if God asked me to sacrifice my entire being, I would. And so the question is, who's being tested? Is it Abraham, or actually is it Isaac? And the story sort of comes down that it's both of them, which is why when they walk, it says very close to one another. It says the two of them walked together, and Isaac looked at his father and said, Dad, I see the knife and I see the fire, but where's the animal for the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will see to the sacrifice, my son, indicating that Isaac may be the sacrifice. And then it repeats again, and the two of them walked together. The first time it says the two of them walked together, Isaac didn't know he was going to be sacrificed. The second time, Rashi suggests he did know that he was going to be sacrificed, and he still went along with it because of that, because of his own sense, if God asked me to sacrifice myself, I would do it. So that's how the commentators make sense of it. But it is complicated because after that, he goes home, and Abraham goes to a different place. One of them goes to Beersheba. Which one goes to Beersheba? I can't remember. No, Isaac or Abraham. But one of them goes, they both go in separate directions, and I don't think they really speak again. Isaac only comes back with Ishmael when his father has died to bury him. So that would be my answer to you, that he feels that he's being tested as well and is willing to offer himself up.
Cantor Syed was here for 44 years. You're now here for 20 years. Cantor, what is it?
6 years.
6 years. Now, Rabbi Falco, the decision-making committee has amazing wisdom. Where does it come from?
God. No, I think, Paul, that speaks to the process that we use. When we start looking for clergy, we have meetings to talk about what are we looking for. And then we start building a committee that's made up of all kinds of people. With the cantor search, we always have members of the choir and people from the junior choir, parents of junior choir members, and part of our educational team. We make sure that there's wide representation. Sometimes the committees have 18 people on them. And then we begin looking at the applicants, and then it's a process of seeing who, it's like dating, right? You meet people, you take them out to dinner, literally, and you see who fits, and we've been very blessed. So that's that. I think it's because it is, we try to make sure that all the different people in our congregation, young and old, are represented.
And we're all happy to be part of that tradition of keeping your clergy for a long time.
Anybody else?
One up here.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the wonderful services. I always enjoy taking part as a chauffeur blower. To kind of further what my dad's question was as far as the reform movement, like kind of moving forward, also as a still relatively young person who also happens to be single and therefore doesn't have a family, it's very hard for me to find connections, both synagogues in my own community or in general. And I guess, is there kind of, I know you guys are making a lot of efforts trying to bring other young adults in, but where is the reform movement, at least, because that's where I'm the most connected, kind of looking at, because it is becoming more and more common that young adults, and we're now getting into middle-aged adults, because I'm 40, finding connections to a community where it is very hard to find those connections. We don't have children to enroll into Hebrew school. It's weird because, adult ed sometimes is people who are much older than us, or there just aren't the right adult ed programs that are interesting to people who are looking to explore their connections, but it's obviously not through family and, and children, which has historically been the case.
Right. I mean, I do think that there are wonderful opportunities online. If a young adult is looking for learning online, there are a lot of opportunities that won't put you in the room with a bunch of 80-year-olds necessarily. That might feel better for you. I know. I think it's really complicated. I think it's difficult because it really depends on your demographics. Rabbi Falco has been trying to really create this Torah on Tap program with young people in the community, but you need a critical mass of people to get it going for people to want to show up. And but they're also not necessarily living here, so right. I mean, I would think that there's more in Jersey City. The reform movement is certainly cares deeply about connecting with that population. I just think for us here, it's very hard because demographically we don't have a core group that's gung-ho about starting it. I mean, Rabbi Falco's fun, but
And we have some things planned for this coming year also, hopefully around the holidays, which tend to bring people together anyway, which would be a good opportunity for us, those who are not who are of a different generation, you might say, to be together and spend time and socialize in that way. The other thing I would add is that when we think about the initiatives of the URJ for youth, like the Kalot and retreats, they pull from the region. So similar to what Rabbi Pankin was saying, people who, a particular synagogue may have 5 people in their youth group, and all 5 of those come together to join for a larger group of everyone from the region, and that's how, when you're younger, those connections are often made and hopefully maintained. But like you said, there's no infrastructure, there's no social infrastructure for people after the college age to be engaged in Jewish communal life, really, unless you take the step into joining a community. And it can be very difficult if you don't have that network already. It's something that the entire, I would say, liberal Jewish world is working to address, and it takes every community to make it happen.
I would also say that, your Jersey City, Manhattan, there's more available there. Central Synagogue, I'm sure, has something, and the JCC on the Upper West Side, probably B'nai Jeshurun as well. There's also something called Moishe House, which, yes, but, yes, so Moishe House is where young people are brought together and sponsored to live in a house, but their obligation is that they have to have Shabbat dinners and invite friends. So it's like getting a fellowship on some level and a place to live, but then their obligation is to build Jewish community with other young people. So that's also one of those places to go.
92nd Street Y.
92nd Street Y also, probably has more young participation. It's also difficult in your age group too, in the sense that when people have children, it's much harder to participate in Jewish life on some level.
It is a weird gap.
Yeah.
And it's a community. It's not just you guys. It's like
It's everybody.
There's a lot of Jews. There's just who's doing the Amidah program and Chabad.
Right,
People.
right.
But it's a synagogue. It's like a marker, kind of getting like a group of people who are growing just getting this.
Right,
So,
right.
I guess the URJ is probably something. And you said they're looking at it.
But then I would also say, is there something that you can do? If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If only for myself, if I wonder what would happen, because I think about how our synagogue started. A bunch of people put advertisements in the paper and the transcript and said, hey, let's meet at the diner. What would happen if you put out on social media, hey, if you're 35 to 45 and looking for Jewish community, we're going to meet at this bar. Let me know if you're going to be there, and see what happens. And begin at grassroots. Because I think that's kind of the other challenge of this, is that, it's often left to organizations to try to solve these problems, but, the Reform movement better than most people, and you know a lot about Judaism and could be a really great leader in starting something and filling that gap. So, one last question, I think, and then we have to go cast off our sins.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a lot easier. I've seen people doing this when the Torah is out, and I never understood what it was.
Do you want to speak?
Yeah, so the way it was described to me again is that this is simply a custom. People would take the edge of their talits and point to the Torah, usually during Hagbah, when we have the Zot HaTorah, Asher Masah Moshe, we all hold it up for the community to see the Torah, and it's just a point to say that is the Torah that Moses received from God on Mount Sinai, so we're pointing to it. Why with the pinky? I was told that because pointing with our index finger might be impolite. It's a tradition. I've met people who, the first time I ever saw it was when I was a member of a conservative congregation, and that was, it's only in communities like that where I find people often do that as a regular practice.
It also, in the prayer that when we're doing it, it says, Al pi Adonai biyad Moshe, that came from the mouth of God to the hand of Moses, that, Moses wrote down the Torah, and so we're sort of holding up our hand like Moses as those who continue Torah. You're welcome. Well, thank you all. Come, we're going to sound some more shofar and throw some bread into the pond. Cast off our sins. Feed the birds. Thank you. I'm good.